It was meant to be a simple job. It was meant to be a simple job. It was meant to be a simple job. Just grab the human and the pelipper she was with and bolt. Even with the human being twice their size and thrice as wide, it was easy. Stun gun to the face, bottle them up in the compact, bolt through the skies back to the ship, and toss them in the brig. Easy. Big lady and reptile lady ready for ransom or enslavement, whichever got the crew more creds. At least, it was easy. Then Silence screwed up. After the two woke, I got in with the crew to chat to them, and see if their families would pay the ransom, or if they could pay for themselves. We separated the two on either side of the brig to ensure they couldn't come at us together. But Silence, that Telbosh, he hit the pelipper when she snarked at him, gloated over doing so. He wasn't gloating when the human roared as if they'd been the one struck, grabbed Silence's tail, and swung him so hard against the brig wall his skull was mulched in an instant. Blood spattered all over the crew as they held down the triggers on their stun guns, but Taryn knew it wouldn't work. He'd been a soldier in what the galaxy called the First Human Interstellar War, but his people knew it as the Jacobian Massacre, after what the humans did to them. He was against trying to enslave that colony. He knew it'd not go well, but that's what happened, and the rebellion was brutal. But he'd seen what happens when humans get that enraged. Seen stun shots bounce off them like air blasts. Seen laser fire sear through their armor, but not slow them down. Seen solid projectiles tear through their muscles, but not stop them from killing his comrades. Wait. Solid projectile. He was holding one. Maybe at this range it could work. He pointed his rifle at the human, as she pummeled Ricard into a bloody pulp and pulled the trigger. The bullet screamed through the air and tore at her, slicing her arms and torso, piercing through her clothes. But either they had hit nothing vital, or she was just that enraged. In response, she reached her arms behind her back and snatched at the handles hanging out from her backpack, tearing what turned out to be a pair of axes through the fabric to slice Pilop and Gurg into meaty chunks. The pelipper cowered against the brick wall, her scales becoming blacker than the space outside as she witnessed this human, who was presumably a friend or a mate or something, brutally slaughter 4 people. Taryn ran, when given the option to stand and face that monster or bolt. He did exactly what he'd done during that war and saved himself. He left the rest of the crew there to face their deaths at the hands of that human. He ran through the ship to the bridge and locked himself in. He heard the screams of his crewmates echo through the halls, saw on the monitoring screens, as the human rampaged through the ship, those axes dealing mortal strikes with each swing, covering the walls in their green blood. He began trying frantically to do anything to slow them down. He closed all the doors, but they were just simple polymer sealers, and she either cut through them or broke them down with sheer strength. It was insane. She was unstoppable, and everywhere she walked she brought death. He saw on the monitors his crewmates' last stand outside the bridge doors, trying desperately to hold the single corridor connecting it to the main body of the ship. It was useless. They were a slaver outfit, after all. Everyone had stun guns except for Tremit, who'd held onto his weapons when he deserted the military. There would be no payout after this. They'd be lucky to escape with their lives. He cursed his clutch cousin, Treminelt, for not being in the bridge where they were meant to be. He was just a soldier. He couldn't pass all the information and controls these monitors were spitting out. He searched frantically to find the control panel that governed the air. If he could still shut the bridge and vent the rest of the ship, he could kill the human. Ridiculous strength and resilience couldn't keep going in the face of an airless ship. They learned that during the war. It was the only tactic they found worked on unsuited humans like this one. But he'd taken too long. The human was already cutting through the door to the bridge. It was a harder polymer, but polymer it still was. Unable to bear the brunt of the madwoman's assault, it was finally torn apart. He pulled his sidearm and fired at the advancing woman, desperately trying to take her down at the last moment, but all he saw was her axes as they came down towards him. Rebecca collapsed onto her hands and knees beside the final Frangif, her breathing coming hard and fast as the rage ended. She covered her face with her hand in an attempt to block out the harsh white lights, but also out of shame. The beautiful white linen shirt Yusa Lee had brought her was stained green. It would never wash out, neither the blood nor the stink of it, but while that was the first proper thought she had, it was not the worst of her problems. She had lost control again. She had not done so since the war ended 10 years ago. Her grandfather warned her not to go, that the family was descended from berserkers, that their bloodline lost control during combat. But all she could think of at the time was the images shown on the news, the mass graves and the children in rope binds that rubbed their skin raw. The war changed Rebecca, but through it she found Yusa Lee, found someone who gave her peace. Crap! Yusa Lee! Rebecca let the axes slip from her hands to thud onto the floor as she turned towards the bridge's entrance, preparing to run and find her beloved. She doesn't have to look far, as Yusa Lee is on the roof out of reach, peering in through the top of the newly destroyed doorway. Her scales were midnight black. She was terrified. But as the young Pelipper began to realize her wife wasn't still in a rage state, her scales turned back to their usual purple and red. Rebecca began to move towards Yusa Lee before collapsing onto the floor again. As the adrenaline began to wear off, she became extremely aware of how much damage she'd taken. She could feel wounds all over her torso, and there were slices across her arms and hands where bullets had torn through her flesh. She felt her wife's cool hands on her face as she stayed down, gasping in pain. Heard her sing that same lullaby she'd sung years ago as Rebecca lay wounded in that hospital tent on Dakobi. The song soothed her, calmed her mind and her body. She felt her heart rate plummet, her muscles relax, the remaining fog of rage clear. It was over. She had won. They had survived. Yusa Lee could pilot the ship back to port. They'd probably even get a payout for dealing with slavers from the government. But for right now, all Rebecca cared about was that her wife was safe. For that was all that mattered to her.